Well, we'd been to different churches, and I had just moved to Wesley Chapel, been there a few months, and we were going to New Walk. And Sherry really loved it, and I kind of did. And then we ended up moving to Lakeland right after that, and still driving to New Walk. This is a few months later because we found our house after a few months of living in an apartment. And just got to the point where it seemed like such a long drive, and I wasn't connecting the way I probably should have with that church. It's a great church, but it wasn't working out all that well for me. So I wanted something else, and I told her, I said, wouldn't it be great if they started a church here in Lakeland? And we could kind of get on the ground floor of the church. A couple weeks later, you come out on stage here at New Walk and say, hey, want to start a church in Auburndale? And we thought, we prayed for this, and it occurred just like that. And just fell in love with the people there, and just been tickled to death to be there.
Well, I had grown up in church, and I'd always gone, and I just wanted Jerry to feel what I feel when I go. And I just prayed and prayed every day for 37 years that he would be on my arm and go into church with me and love it as much as I did. And he didn't never seem like he had the time to go, or he was always working and he was always tired, so he didn't go much, but I always did. And so I've always had Jesus in my heart, but it means a lot more when you spend it with your spouse.
It was always her wanting me to go, always pushing, and I couldn't make this connection that I needed to make. And it's really odd how things worked out, because the minute I saw you on stage and then talked to you later after you'd been up talking about building this new church, I thought to myself, gosh, there is something about him, and I could feel the need to help you for whatever I was supposed to do. That's all I remember, that push, that feeling that I needed to, which goes back to what she was saying. That's the way she always feels, and she wants me to feel that way. Well, she got her wish, because I got to feel that way, and I got to feel that way in Kairos. So
he said he literally felt a push. And it was a push when I was baptized. I had been baptized as a little girl in a creek, and the day that I got baptized up there that you baptized me, I literally felt a push out of my chair to go get baptized. And then when our prayer was answered for our church, then you baptized Jerry too. So that was probably the best day of my life.
It's funny when you have just one more thing in common, how much closer you actually get to be. And when you enjoy something together, it does make you closer. And that's what I've noticed about going to church together and serving together, is we are closer. Spiritually, I'm totally different than I was 2 years ago. I feel totally different. I have such a softer heart when it comes to a lot of things, and I'm more open to other people, and being able to share what I feel with other people. That's how much this church has changed me. And so I know that has to do with God. I know He's there doing it. So that's how my relationship with Him has changed. I feel like I'm doing what He wants me to do when I'm at that church. And in doing His will, life just gets better.
It means a lot to me to go to church as a couple. I took our kids when they were little, and I just felt like something was missing. Of course, it was him, but we definitely feel a lot closer together. We enjoy it, and we can't wait for Saturday and Sunday, because we do both, and we love it, and we just want everybody else to love it like we do.
There's a sense of people being genuine, and when you're around them, you can be yourself, you can be at ease, and you can feel like you're at home. And that's what everybody at Kairos does for me. They make me feel glad to be there. I look forward to going to a church. For the first time in my life, I look forward to going and spending time with people in a church. And that's where I want to be every Sunday. That's where I want to be.
Man, just such a cool story, a cool journey, and definitely one I'm excited to talk about with you all today. But first, man, welcome. We're so glad that you're here for part 4 of our series, Momentous. It's been a phenomenal series so far. We've been just hearing all kinds of great stories of life change, been inspired. There's been conversations going on Facebook and online, and just it's so cool. But I love Jerry and Sherry's story. It's a story of persistence, of perseverance, of trusting God's timing. It's a story that led Sherry and Jerry to Kairos Church and into our lives. And if you haven't got a chance to spend time with them, to talk with them, do it, because you're missing out, because these are just phenomenal people. And we're so glad that they are a part of Kairos. Now, you go back and you think about some of the things that they said in their story. And, 37 years, she said, she prayed and she waited for her husband. 37 years, she, went to church. Sherry went to church on her own, attended with her kids. And I was just thinking about that. For 37 years, Jerry, for whatever reason, chose not to attend. We all have reasons in our lives for not doing things. We all have reasons in our lives for maybe not wanting to change. And I think that's what I want to talk about today, is experiencing momentous change in our lives. But we have reasons why we don't. It's easy to get set in our ways. It's easy to just want to do things the way that we've always done them. It's easy to say that, well, it's too hard, so why even try, right? It's easy to get comfortable with life and just coast through life. And I think also it's really easy to get discouraged by the failed attempts when you tried to change or when you tried to step out and do something new. But here's what I know. And here's what I want to get to you by the end of the day, is that when we push past all of these things, the comfort, the ease, and all of that, we get to experience breakthrough in our lives and freedom and transformation and change. And when that happens, we come alive. We feel alive. There's this joy. And man, it's just this amazing thing that we have in our life. For Jerry, for the last year, man, I've watched this man come alive. It's like the sleeping beast has awakened. Now, he's not a beast to be scared of. He's like this joyous, wonderful, amazing beast that has come alive in Jesus. And is this just joy that you see? No matter what he's doing, he could be unloading the trailer and just joyful. Or tearing down all the parking stuff and the cones and the signs and joyful. If he's just grabbing a donut, he just exudes this joy. And it's a joy that I believe comes from being on mission for Jesus. It's a joy that comes from a change through Jesus, from being in the presence of other Jesus followers. It's a joy I love seeing in Jerry's life and in Sherry's life every single week. It's a joy. It's a joy, and it's something that we want to do. Now, as we talk about this, as I was listening to their video, I got to thinking about a story in the Bible that kind of was along the same lines. It's found in Luke chapter 5, and if you have your Bible, you can turn there, but it'll also be on the screens for you to follow along. But before we get into God's word, I want to pray with you guys, so if you would pray with me. God, today, we come to you wanting to hear from you. God, desperately, we want to hear from you. We want your help. We want to have your word just, man, stir our spirit. God, we want, man, to experience what you have to say to us. God, today, no matter what's going on, no matter the things that are happening outside these walls, may today we be able to focus our heart and mind on you so that you can challenge us and change us to be more like your son, Jesus. It's in his name that I pray. Amen. Luke chapter 5, verse 2 is where we're going to start. And it says this: in Jerusalem, there is a pool with 5 covered porches, which is called Bethesda in the Hebrew language. Verse 3, it says, many sick people were lying on the porches beside the pool. Some were blind, some were crippled, and some were paralyzed. And they waited for the water to move. Sometimes an angel of the Lord would come down to the pool and stir up the water. After the angel did this, the first person to go into the pool was healed from any sickness he had. A man was lying there who had been sick for 38 years. And when Jesus saw the man and knew that he had been sick for such a long time, Jesus asked him a simple question. Do you want to be well? Do you want to be well? It's one of those things where Jesus, he asks questions like this, and he already knows the answer, right? He always does that. He knows the answer to this question, but you see a man who's been, sick for 38 years. He's lying there wishing and hoping that he could be healed, and Jesus asked this question. do you want to be well? You know, something I want you to think about in your life. Just think about something that you've always done. Think about how you always lived or things that you always do. Think about habits and routines and all those things. Why do you do those things? Why do you continue doing those things? Where'd they come from? Was it something that was learned? Was it something that was passed down from your parents, or it was something that you experienced in a relationship? Maybe it was a past hurt and you're choosing to live your life because of that, or maybe it was a past enjoyment and you're choosing to live life off of that. Maybe in your life you have a bad habit that's become second nature, and there's no way that you would believe that you could ever kick it. Or maybe the way that you interact with people is negative all the time, and you just think to yourself, and other people have even said to this, well, that's okay. That's just how they've always been. They'll probably never change. Or maybe even worse, you think that there's nothing wrong with either one of those things. Here's what I say all that is I want you to understand that momentous change won't happen until you admit that there's a problem. You see, that's what Jesus asked him. Do you want to be well? Momentous change won't happen until you admit that you are well, until you admit that you need to change. It goes on. So he says to him, do you want to be well? In verse 7, the sick man answered, Sir, there's no one to help me get into the pool when the water starts moving. While I'm coming to the water, someone always gets in before me. I find it interesting that the man actually never answered the question. He never said, yes, I want to be well, or no, I don't want to be well. He kind of just came back to Jesus with excuses as to why he thinks change won't happen. And I think that we do the same thing in our life. We think and we feel that maybe if we try to go to a church, we won't find a church that fits us. We think that change, we won't be able to do it. We don't think that it'll make a difference. We think and feel that there is no hope for me or there is no help for me. I think a lot of times in our lives, we get used to living a certain way for such a long time that when it comes to change, it is hard. It's hard to accept it. It's hard to adapt to it. But here's what I know, and here's what this story shows us. When Jesus compels you to move, when Jesus, compels you to change, to act, to love, and when you respond to that question, do you want to be well, and you say, yes, I do, transformation and change will take place. It'll take place, but you got to admit that you need it, that you need the change, that you need the help, that you need transformation. Verse 8, after he said all this stuff, he says, I can't. Then Jesus says to this man, he says, stand up, pick up your mat and walk. And immediately the man was well. He picked up his mat and he began to walk. It took place immediately. And I'm not sure how long this man sat by this pool. We know he'd been sick for 38 years. We don't know if he'd been by the pool for 38 years. But even if he'd been there for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, that's a long time for him to sit by this pool. I don't know how long. Sadly, this happens. But when Jesus showed up, when Jesus brought healing and transformation to this man's life, it happened immediately. The change happened immediately because Jesus showed up. But the thing about this is that when you choose to follow Jesus, there's this immediate change that takes place, but it is a lifelong process, and it's going to be challenging. So the transformation and change will take place immediately, but you got to continue to choose to follow him. You see, the moment you choose to follow Jesus, you will experience resistance. Going on in our story, this is exactly what took place in this man's life. He got healing, 38 years, and now he's healed. And in verse 9 it says, now this happened on the Sabbath day. So the Jews, the religious leaders of the time, said to the man who had been healed, this is crazy, they say, today is the Sabbath. It is against our law for you to carry your mat on the Sabbath. Are you kidding me? You're going to come at me with your law and not even be happy by the fact that for 38 years I've been sick and now this man has healed me and you're coming at me because I'm carrying my mat. And that's what you're going to tell me. You're not going to say, hey man, congratulations on being able to walk again. It's crazy to me that these men would come up. I'd be like, yo, Do you not see what's happening? Why is the mat so important? And sadly, what happens in our lives, there are so many people that should be happy for us, that should be encouraging to us in our lives when we experience that change, but they don't. And they bring resistance and they tell us they don't want it. See, haters tend to miss the miracle. And that's what happened with the religious leaders of the time. They missed the miracle that took place. Haters tend to not believe in your change. As a matter of fact, they make you want to doubt your change. This man has been healed. 38 years he had been sick, and now he's healed, and all these religious leaders wanted to do was focus on the problem. Well, you're not doing it the way that we think you should do it. You can't carry your mat that you've been laying on for 38 years. Nope, go lay back down. Go back to the way you were. Go back to being sick. It's so crazy to me that this was the response to this man being healed. And here's what I want you to know. When momentous change takes place in your life, there will always be a challenge in the middle of your change. You know, it's interesting. As I saw these two words together, I saw it. If you want to experience change in your life, guess what? Challenge is a part of it. It is not going to be easy. It is not going to be something that just happens and then you're like, okay, cool, I can just keep doing the things. No, there's going to be challenge when you experience that change. When you go up against the status quo, expect resistance. When you go up against sin, expect resistance. When you choose to not sin the way that you used to with friends that you used to, and it challenges and convicts them, expect resistance from them. You see, when Jesus gets a hold of you and you are radically transformed, it will be hard for other people to believe it and accept it because you've lived one way for such a long time, and now Jesus come along and he's changed your life, and you're saying no to the things that you used to do or being lazy or being comfortable. You see, a sinful world will always resist heavenly change. Always. When you get that, when Jesus encounters you and you begin to live for him, the world is going to come against you. There's going to be friction. There's going to be a challenge to the change. There'll be skeptics. There'll be unbelief. There'll be hurdles. But don't let the haters keep you from pursuing the change that Jesus has for you in your life. And I was thinking about this in Jerry's life, 30 plus years. 30 plus years, on Sundays, he kind of just remained dormant. Sleeping and waiting and maybe being comfortable. I don't want to speak for him, but I'm thinking about what this looked like in his life. For 30 years, he was doing that. And since Jesus got a hold of him, Jerry is running to serve God. Jerry is running to be at the church. Jerry is running towards people and towards Jesus. I mean, I'm talking Saturday and Sunday. That's what momentous change looks like. And let me tell you, it's a byproduct of Sherry's persistence. Because Sherry didn't want to give up on him. Sherry wanted him to experience life in Jesus the same way that she did. Sherry wanted to live for Jesus with her husband, living for Jesus by her side, and ultimately, she wanted to be able to spend eternity with him as well. So it's a byproduct of Sherry's persistence. It's not a product of it, because change is always a product of Jesus. I need you to understand that. And you and me, and we can't make people change. We don't bring change. Jesus brings change. It's our job to be Jesus to others, but we can never be change to others. We can never cause change in others. I think a lot of times we try to fix people, but we can't. We can't. Only Jesus can. Only Jesus and Jesus alone brings about change in people's lives. And what do we got to do? We got to keep presenting the opportunity, though, right? That's what Sherry did. We got to keep pointing people to Jesus. We got to keep doing whatever we can to engage those who have not yet embraced Jesus, so that when Jesus comes along, when Jesus shows up, change and healing and transformation will take place. I was thinking about this man, and for however long he sat by the pool, and he couldn't save himself, right? And many times we try to fix ourselves. We try to change ourselves. We try to do things on our own, and it doesn't work out. He didn't have any help either. He said it. He admitted to it. No one will help me. And maybe if he had help, it would have happened sooner. But here's what I know and believe, that change through Jesus will always happen in God's timing. It's not in our timing. It's not when we want it. We get very impatient about it, but God says, no, it'll happen in my timing, in God's timing. And, see, Jerry did have help. He had a great example. He had a wife who pursued and loved Jesus. He had help, but for 37 years, it didn't matter. But when Jesus showed up, when Jesus compelled him, that's when it began to matter. Same is true in this man's life. There were many opportunities for him to be healed. But he couldn't experience any of them. But lasting change happened when Jesus showed up. Lasting change in our lives happens when Jesus shows up. Change isn't going to happen from another person. It's going to happen when Jesus shows up into your life. And if you're here today and there is someone in your life that you have been, desperately praying for, desperately desiring for them to have a relationship with Jesus and modeling that for him, can I just tell you, don't give up on helping people embrace Jesus, because you never know when he'll show up and get a hold of them. You never know. You just got to keep going after. You got to keep doing what God has called you to do. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to kind of give you 6 steps. 6 steps to momentous change. These will be quick. I'm going to fire these off pretty quick. Some of them I've already gone over. And the last one I want to talk about in a little bit more depth. But number 1 is this. If you want to experience momentous change, you got to ask. You got to ask the question, do I want to change? Do I want to be well? Because listen, if in your life you don't think there's a problem, if you don't think there's an issue, if you don't see what everyone else is pointing at you, change isn't going to happen. Do you want to be well? Do you want to experience change? The next thing, number 2, is believe. You got to believe that change can happen. And Jesus asked this man, do you want to be well? And he came back at Jesus with excuses. Well, I don't have help, and it's too hard. Man, a lot of times we give Jesus our excuses, and we say, well, I don't have this, and they're not helping me. Instead of focusing on who's not helping you and what you don't have, why don't you start focusing on who can help and what you do have? Do you believe that change can happen? So you ask, you believe. The third thing is you want to embrace. Embrace change immediately. Embrace change immediately. In verse 8, it says, Jesus said to the man, stand up, pick up your mat and walk. And immediately the man was well. See, when you encounter Jesus, when you feel compelled to move, to act, to change, to go in a different direction, do it. I think for so many people, and on any given Sunday, or maybe any day during the week, they feel this nudge, they feel this push, they feel Jesus working and moving in their life, but they kind of put up a wall and say, no, I think I'm going to wait. If you feel Jesus compelling you or nudging you or pushing you, move, act, do something, embrace the change. Number 4 is to share. You got to share your change. Share what's taking place. We've been talking about this whole series, our Kairos story. It's meant to be shared, and it's meant to inspire. It's meant to bring hope. But this is what the man did in verse 15. He said, then the man left and told the people that Jesus was the one that made him well. You need to tell people that Jesus is the one that brought about the change in your life. You need to be able to share your story. Number 5 is to prepare. You got to prepare for resistance. And what I need you to understand is that the most resistance that you're going to experience will probably come from yourself. It's that self-resistance, because for however long you've been so used to doing things one way, or you've been so used to sinning one way, you've been so used to going after this thing, and as you change, you will resist the change. You will want to go back to the way it's always been. You will want to keep doing the things that you've always done. So you got self-resistance. And then if you are working towards it and continuing to pursue Jesus, your family and your friends who may not know Jesus may resist the change as well. They may say, well, I don't like the new Brent. I don't like who you are now. And I want you to do the things that we used to do. So you have self-change, family, friends change, or self-resistance, family and friends resistance. And then the last one that's really important to understand is that the enemy will resist the change. Because for however many years of your life, he has had a grip on your life. He has had a hold of you. And now through Jesus, you've experienced freedom, and he will do anything he can to keep you from pursuing Jesus. Prepare for resistance. The last and final thing, the 6th thing, is this. You got to keep the change. Keep the change. That's funny. Keep the change. Yeah, y'all are just now getting it. You got to keep the change. And I put on there, stop sinning. And this comes from verse 14. It says later, Jesus found the man at the temple and said to him, see, you're well now. It's like Jesus was like, good, I see what I did. Anyway, he says, you're well now. And then he says, stop sinning so that something worse doesn't happen to you. He kind of just calls him out and says, stop sinning. He says, don't go back to your mat. Get rid of your mat that you've been on. Get rid of the things that will enable or encourage or entice you to go back into sin. You want your message change to stay? Then stop going back to your sin. That's what Jesus says. If you want to continue to experience this change and this transformation in your life, stop going back to your sin. Now, I was thinking about this, and I brought this mat up here with me today. Now, just imagine for a minute. You were there the day that Jesus showed up and healed this man. And this man, for however many years, he was laying down, and he was motionless. He couldn't do anything in his life, and all he wanted was to experience change and healing. He wanted to get up from his mat. He wanted to be free from what was holding him back. And you experienced and you saw Jesus tell this man to stand up, to pick up his mat, and to walk. And it was phenomenal. Because you've been there every day, and you've been praying for people, and you've been trying to help people. And Jesus shows up, and this man who you've watched lay there for however many years gets up. Now imagine, 2 days from then, you show up to the same pool, the same place, and guess what? You see that man, and he's laying down again. He's back on his mat. He's back living life the way that he used to. Like, what would go through your mind if you saw this man who'd been living in just pain and hurt and comfortable and complacency, and you saw him laying there? I don't know about you, but I'd be frustrated. I'd go up to him and be like, bro, what are you doing? 38 years of your life, all you've wanted was to get up from your mat. All you've wanted is to experience change and healing in your life, and now you're back on your mat like it never happened. What are you doing? Why did you go back? Why did you go back to your sin? Why did you go back to the way you were living? You see, it's easy as we look on that and we get so frustrated. Why would that man ever do that? That's dumb. No one would ever do that. Sadly, this is what people do every single day. They experience change and healing and transformation through Jesus Christ, and they get up, right? And they have their mat, and Jesus heals them, and they're like, yes, Lord, I'm free. I don't need this mat anymore. And they go on living their life. But a week from then, something happens. The temptation that they used to get tempted by, the sin that they used to love so much, creeps back in, and they begin to look back to the way they used to live. Or a friend shows up and says, hey man, you want to go do what we used to do? The temptation shows up, and you realize that there is challenge to your change. And it's difficult. It's difficult, and we find ourselves back on our mat, back in our sin, like the transformation and change never took place. I wonder in your life, has that ever happened to you? Are you someone who Jesus brought freedom from pain, from hurt, from regret, and change and healing, but you're still living like it never happened? Has that happened to you? And what I want to say to all of us, myself included, is that we need to learn to live in our freedom instead of staying stuck in our sin. We get enticed by it. And you can either choose to run back towards it, or you can run towards your Savior. Here's what I know. If you keep choosing sin, if you keep going back to your sin, you will never experience the change that God desires for you. So what do? We pursue Jesus. And as we pursue Jesus, guess what? Sin will lose its grip on our life. As we pursue Jesus, we'll be free from the consequences of sin. As we pursue Jesus, what we will begin to do is we'll begin to look back at how our life used to be and how we used to be wasting it, and say, I don't ever want to go back to living the way that I was. I want to keep pursuing Jesus for everything. Lasting change comes from a continual pursuit of Jesus. I was thinking about this in my life. When my momentous change took place, I can just remember what my life was like. And I would go to work, and I'd come home so excited. You want to know what I was excited about? Playing a video game. All day long, all I would think about was getting gear. What raids can I do? What stuff can I get for this virtual character online? That was my only purpose. That was the only thing that drove my life. How pathetic is that? And it wasn't until a moment that Jesus showed up, and I had known about Jesus. I had heard about him long before that, but for whatever reason, I kept going back. I kept going back to this thing that consumed me, that kept me comfortable, that kept me complacent, that kept me purposeless. I remember the day it happened, because that day it changed everything. And it was tough. It was difficult to reverse the way that I've always lived. But after years and years of consistently and persistently saying no to my sin and to my momentous change took place. And now today, because of that, I'm living on purpose. And here's what I can tell you for a fact. If that change never happened, I doubt I'd be married today. If that change never happened, I would not be a pastor today. If that change never happened, I wouldn't be a foster or adoptive parent. I refuse to let the way that it was keep me from the way that it was meant to be. Church, I'm going to ask that you would stand with me. As you stand, I wonder today, will you let your mat keep you from your purpose? Or will you get up off it and never go back to it? Today, I wonder, what is your mat? What is your sin? What is